Okay, today I feel in a very good mood. So I'm going to share some secrets with you guys. My name is Chris and my profile is not typical. I moved from being a civil engineer working in construction to become a PM at Google. From construction to landing into a top 10 MBA program and offers from Meta, Amazon, Boston Consulting Group, Google, and even Starbucks. I am creating this page to give away the secrets that even a $200,000 MBA program won't give you. Now, let's get into it. Most people who are interviewing at big companies don't fail interviews because they're unqualified in any real sense. And in fact, if you look closely at the candidates who get rejected again and again, you often find that they actually have strong experience. Sometimes even from very impressive companies or schools. But the problem is that when they are put under pressure and asked to explain what they've done, their answers collapse into something that sounds like a loose collection of ideas, rather than a structured story that an interviewer can actually follow. Which is why you end up hearing things like, I worked on a complex project, I used data, I tried my best and it went very well, which feels harmless to be honest when you say it out loud, but in reality does almost nothing to help the interviewer understand your value. And the uncomfortable truth is that in high-stake interviews, whether it's at companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, or consulting firms like BCG, the interviewer is not actually trying to test how hard you work. They are trying to build a mental model of how you think, how you solve problems, and how you operate under constraints. Which means that if your answer doesn't create a clear picture in their mind, it doesn't matter how good your experience actually is, because it simply never lands. They know that you have not led ads in another company when you're applying to Google. They know that you've not dealt with the CEO trying to improve their, supply chain problem. They know that you've not done that. But when they ask you questions, they want to see that if you were placed in such a situation, what would you do? That is the gap I want to fix today. Because once you understand it, everything about interviews changes, and I'm going to show you how using a simple structure that most people know, but almost nobody actually uses properly, can change your status. From no hire to strong hire. I'm talking about the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. Except the key insight here is that STAR is not just a memorization tool or a template you plug sentences into. It is actually a way of forcing clarity in your thinking so that what you say becomes easy to follow, even under pressure. Let's take a real interview question as an example. I feel when we relate to real life, it's always easier to make someone understand. So let's take something like, tell me about a challenging project you worked on. And I want you to really pay attention to how most people naturally respond to this, because they usually start by trying to sound impressive rather than being precise. So you get an answer that sounds like this, and pay attention, because I'm going to include the details, but notice how it still fails. So, in early 2023, I was working on this really big merger. It was a $200 million deal, and it was super complex because we had to combine two different operating systems. It was a very hard project. I noticed that overhead was going up by about 22%, and that was bad for our EBITDA, so leadership was worried. I decided I needed to fix it. I was helping improve operations, and I tried to bring the costs down. I ran a bunch of numbers, I did some data analysis, and I talked to a lot of different teams. I implemented some solutions, and we found some duplicate contracts. In the end, we reduced the overhead, and my manager was really happy with the result. It was a huge success, and now the system is used everywhere. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Chris, that had the numbers. It had the 200 million and the 22%. Why is that bad? It's bad because even though the facts are there, the logic is missing. It sounds like a grocery list of things that happened to you, rather than a story of how you drove a result. The moment you slow it down and actually analyze it, you realize there's almost nothing concrete for the interviewer to hold on to regarding your decision making. And the first breakdown point is always the situation, the S in STAR. Because most candidates think they are supposed to describe difficulty using adjectives like hard, complex, or extremely challenging. But those words are completely meaningless in a professional interview setting, because every single candidate says that, and more importantly, they don't tell the interviewer anything about context or stakes, which is what actually matters when someone is trying to evaluate your impact. So instead of saying something vague or just tossing numbers into a blender, a strong candidate anchors the situation in something real and measurable. Something like this. In early 2023, I was leading a post-merger integration for a $200 million company where two different operating systems were being combined into one unified structure. And within the first 6 months of that integration, we started seeing operational overhead increase by 22%, which was directly putting pressure on our EBITDA targets and forcing leadership to question whether the merger was actually delivering value at all. Now, notice what changed here. Because without adding any extra complexity, the situation suddenly feels real. It has numbers. It has consequences. It has stakes. And most importantly, it gives the interviewer something they can actually visualize, instead of just hearing abstract words. And I always hear a concern from candidates. They worry that they shouldn't share too much because of confidentiality. They think, oh, I can't talk about the 200 million or the specific overhead. But how am I breaching confidentiality when I give such a situation? I'm telling nothing about the specific company name. I'm not giving away trade secrets, yet I'm still giving so much context for the situation, so the interviewer knows what is on the line. Anyway, then we move into the task. And this is where most people completely lose structure because they confuse being involved in projects with having a clearly defined objective. In that bad example I gave earlier, the person said, I was helping improve operations and I tried to bring the costs down. That doesn't actually define success in any meaningful way. It just describes activity. Trying is not a task. Helping is not a task. A proper task, how would I put it? It's not what you did. It is what you were responsible for achieving under constraints. For example, saying something like, my objective was to bring that 22% overhead back down to baseline within a 90-day period, while maintaining headcount because the company was in a growth phase and could not afford to lose key talent. Boom. That immediately introduces not just the goal, but also boundaries around how that goal can be achieved. And that is what makes it interesting to an interviewer, because now they can actually evaluate how hard the problem really was. They see that you couldn't just fire everyone to save money, you had to be smarter than that. And once you understand that, the action section becomes even more important, because this is where interviewers are no longer interested in summaries or high-level statements. This is where the bad example really died. It said, I ran a bunch of numbers and talked to teams. That's useless. They want to see how you think step by step, almost like they are watching your internal decision-making process unfold in real time. Which is why saying things like, I analyzed data, or I worked with teams, completely fails. Because it removes all visibility into your actual reasoning. Instead, what strong candidates do is they break their thinking into a logical sequence. And the thing is, when you're laying out the actions, you have to number them. If you number them, it's a huge advantage. So when you say first, second, third, and fourth, the interviewer, if they're writing notes, can record them very easily. Let's look at how a pro does the action section. First, I audited both sets of operational data to identify structural redundancies inherited from both companies. I wasn't just looking at the total cost. I was looking at where the overlap was happening. Second, during that audit, I discovered duplicate vendor contracts that were quietly driving unnecessary costs at scale. We were essentially paying twice for the same software in different departments. Third, I designed a centralized reporting system that gave regional managers real-time visibility into spending patterns for the first time, so they could catch these leaks themselves. And finally, I ran cross-functional working sessions to redesign procurement workflows in a way that removed unnecessary approval layers that were slowing everything down. See how much better that is? The interviewer will follow up on whatever you say and everything will be clear, and it is very unlikely that they will ask confusing follow-up questions if your answer is that transparent. What is important here is not just the actions themselves, but the fact that the interviewer can now clearly see how you move from problem identification to system design to organizational execution, which is exactly what companies like Google or BCG are actually evaluating, even if they never say it directly. One more thing about the actions, because I believe that's the core of the answer. That's the most important part of the answer. I would say lengthwise, it should be 60% of your answer in terms of time. So if your answer is, let's say, 4 minutes, 60% of that 4 minutes should go into the actions. Why? Because the situation and task are just the setup. The action is the movie. Now let's talk about the results, the R. And this is where most people unintentionally weaken their entire answer. In the bad example, it was, the manager was happy and the system is used everywhere. That's fine for a casual conversation, but in a business context, it is basically meaningless because it doesn't communicate any measurable impact. Strong candidates instead layer their results. They don't just give one result, they give 3, starting with financial impact. We reduced operational overhead by 25%, which translated into $4.2 million in annual savings. And yes, it's always better to put the exact number there if you can. Then, moving into operational impact. We reduced the procurement cycle time from 14 days down to just 3 days, which fundamentally changed how fast the organization could respond to new market demands. And finally, adding long-term impact. The reporting system I designed was adopted globally across all 5 regions and is still being used by senior leadership today as their primary visibility tool for spend management. Notice that last part. This is not only adding to the long-term impact, but also to the scalability, showing that when you're solving for something, you're not just fixing that one little thing in front of you, but creating a solution that could be scaled to other parts of the business. You're showing them that you are a system thinker. You're not only solving the problem at hand, you're solving many problems at the same time. And when you put all of that together, what you start to see is that the difference between a weak answer and a strong answer is not intelligence. And it is not even experience. It is simply clarity under pressure. And that is exactly what the STAR method is really training. Because once your thinking becomes structured enough that someone else can easily follow it, you are no longer just answering interview questions. You are controlling how your value is perceived in the room. And that is what actually gets you remembered when the hiring committee meets. Now, before I wrap up, there is one more thing I would add to the STAR method, which is outside the acronym itself. Once you end with the result, one very big thing that you could add, and this is a pro move, is a reflection. What that whole experience taught you. Sometimes, if you want, you can say what you would change about it if you had to do it again. Now, I usually prefer to let the interviewer ask the "what would you change" part, because they love to ask that, so you should be prepared to answer it anyway. But adding a proactive reflection is a very good part, because even if they don't ask you about it in an indirect way, you're telling them that, hey, I'm learning, I'm open to feedback, and I'm someone who's very easy to work with because I'm always looking to improve. It shows emotional intelligence, which is just as important as your engineering or consulting skills. So basically, I believe we're at the end of this video. Hopefully this deep dive helped you, and hopefully it will help you land your job at those big companies, your dream companies, whether it's Google, Amazon, or any company that you'd like to be part of. Again, I'm Chris, and I'm here to always help. I'll keep posting more and more of these videos, breaking down the stuff that usually stays behind closed doors. If you like this video, please just type in the comment section what you liked. What would you like me to improve? Just give me ideas on what I should cover in my next videos, because I am telling you, so many videos are coming. I'm going to try to cover almost everything about the corporate game, but if you tell me what you need right now, I can prioritize those topics over others. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, put in your comments, and hit those likes. I'll see you in the next one.